Hi everybody, it's the show with Ron, and I'm Ron, obviously, and we're going to be looking at headlines today and giving some context, maybe some background, putting things in perspective so we don't get so uptight about it. And right off the bat here, we're looking at Drudge again, who maybe a little less nowadays, but in the past was somebody who presented headlines that influenced a lot of the media, and I think he still does. So here on the front, we've got one of these photos that the media loves of Trump, and they always present a bad photo. And at this point, I'm not sure if it's just the media presenting a bad photo of Trump, or he literally can't take a good photo, but they love showing him in the worst possible light. And both sides, not just the Democrats, but the Republicans as well, because as we know, the Republicans, the establishment, and we've been talking about this for months now, have been hoping that Trump could be replaced with a less crazily controversial character. And in the run-up to the New Hampshire primaries, the second primaries on the 23rd, there are these stories that are being floated, saying, well, Haley's got a chance to win. She could actually win. Independent voters need to come out and vote for Haley to stop Trump. Certainly the Haley campaign recognizes that and is working hard to try to offset Trump. And for their part, you see, we noticed that we know that the media doesn't really play up all of the gaffes that Biden makes, his obviously senile presentation of himself often. But when Trump does it, and Trump almost has as many of them sometimes, here he is confusing Nancy Pelosi with Nikki Haley, etc. This is all part of the idea that to try to warn voters off of voting for Trump, and try to get Haley in as a better candidate. Of course, getting in Haley is also a danger for the Democrats, because even though the media doesn't play up Biden's senility, because we have the internet, because we have social media, those clips are very clear, and people see that in the United States as they do around the world, even while the media is often silent on that. This was sort of interesting. This is this lady, I think her name, they pronounce Fannie T. Willis. This is part of the district attorney's office in Georgia, one of the state cases against Trump for interfering with the election. So what happens when you're a smaller town figure or a smaller state figure like Fannie T. Willis, who dares to take on Trump, or just to get involved in any big national dispute? Well, they've dug into her past and found that she hired her boyfriend, or someone she hired became her boyfriend. They're digging into all of the financial records, and so all of anything that she ever did will now be laid bare in the press. I guess that's what you've got to be up for if you play in the big leagues. Here we have a... Okay, at least this piece is put as opinion. Excuse me. This is crazy. I remember this as far back as the 80s, when you have the two political parties, and someone would saying, well, why would you... Obviously, it's irrational to vote for say, Reagan. He wants a strong defense. He He at least says he wants to balance the budget. He wants to lower taxes. That's irrational. That it can't be an actual policy we can discuss. So there must be a reason that people, crazy people, in fact, the huge majority of people are voting for one party over the other. And so they get down to something like this, saying that, the reason some people believe of the wrong thing, the incorrect thing, is because some sort of tribalism, emotionalism, this sort of thing. It's easier than discussing the issues. After all, we live in an era where anyone who doesn't want to spend trillions and trillions more every year, all in deficit, is called a radical right winger, because and it's not. This is the government shutdown thing. People who want to shut down the government. What they're doing is they just don't want to spend an extra trillion when the U.S. is already 34 trillion in debt. Of course, some of those people who are doing that are crazy right-wing people as well. But it's funny that we've gotten to a point that the only people who don't want to spend are crazy people. Maybe there's something to this polarization after all. But I just wanted to point out here that, see, I think the reason that the polarization, so to speak, is happening now is that, we're seeing a realignment of politics, where the Republican Party has kind of gone back to its isolationist pre-World War II roots. And that is, as the U.S. has become energy independent, it doesn't have to focus as much on the Middle East. And we went through a period after 9/11 where there were two disastrous wars that were undertaken by a Republican president, the one into Afghanistan and Iraq. And the media worked very hard for many years to kind of educate the public that those were bad. They spend too much money, and the president is a war criminal and should be in The Hague, and they kill innocent women and children. And I think people on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, they listen to that. And I felt myself feeling, yeah, well, maybe they have a point. We shouldn't have wars. So, we go on to later presidents where you have a Democrat like Obama, who also has a completely elective war in Libya. The media is not as tough on him, obviously. And now we're in a period where we have Biden spending big and getting almost involved. We have the Ukraine situation and the thing in the Middle East again. So the public is much less amenable. There isn't a Cold War threat. It seems like something that's happening far away, that's not maybe in our strategic interest and particularly in Europe. You could look at and say there's some of the richest countries in the world, right there in Europe, Germany, Sweden. Why is the U.S. have to come in and give $100 billion every few months for the defense of Ukraine? Now, of course, the overall story is, yeah, we really do need to attend to these two hot spots in the world. And it is probably the best that the U.S., with its resources and its leadership, is probably the only one who's going to do that. So it has to be done. And it's a neat juncture in history that if there were leadership in the White House instead of senile Biden, maybe we could do something to finally crush Russia and its ambitions. But what I'm trying to describe here is what's going on in the background. Why, this sort of article paints it as kind of illogical as to why people would be on one side of the fence or the other. I'm certain there's something to this, but I think we're also seeing something organic, and it's not just irrationality or emotionalism that causes people to break with long-standing U.S. Foreign policy decisions and decisions of spending colossal amounts of money on far-off foreign wars. got a big game there in Buffalo. You wouldn't think I was a sports guy, but I do like the NFL. It's a very interesting technical, tactical game, which appeals to my thinking or lack thereof. There's Alec Baldwin. You see a lot of people on the right are gleeful about his troubles, his shooting, accidental or otherwise, on that set, because they know that they see him as a sort of a left-wing rabble-rouser. I don't know. Be a tough spot to be in, to be him, and he has these manslaughter charges now. Got more on Richard Simmons. I always liked Richard Simmons. I was joking. I grew up watching his little shows. Made me the man I am today. I've even got his hair at this point almost. But and they do note he's a flamboyant fitness coach. Got far right stuff happen there in Europe. Just to note this, this is part of, as I was talking about earlier, the U.S. public less amenable to foreign wars and big outlays of money. That's obviously going to embolden ambitious countries like China, who might see a one moment in time juncture when they could seize Taiwan for various reasons. Even the internal politicking, it may be demographically the one time they could run such an operation to seize back Taiwan, maybe gain control of more area in the South China Seas, and the U.S. would be like, we're not interested in that. Of course, we have Trump, who seems very opposed to all of the foreign wars. So I'm sure some of these countries are licking their chops at the prospect of a U.S. that does not want to be engaged in spending on defense of other countries in the world. Americans, are you looking for love in Colombia? Who is doing that? You shouldn't be looking for anything in Colombia. I'm sure it's a fantastic country and culture. I'd like to see it someday, but that's too much danger. And I wanted to show this article as well. This was on Trump yesterday, but when I got the Trump Drudge, it was on Drudge yesterday, and when I looked at the Drudge page today, it had already dropped off the page as I was looking at it. But this is an interesting, I would interpret this as a sort of an advocacy article. World War III has already begun. It's warning issues, no chance for peace for decades. And essentially, this is an advocacy piece to note that this will have World War III unless the U.S. starts spending more money on defense of all these countries. Criticizing the Biden administration. See, the Biden's going into an election year where probably the preponderance of the U.S. public, and particularly young people who they assumed they took for granted would be voting Democrat, are against these foreign wars. And again, who can blame them? Because the media worked very, very hard just in recent years to tell people that, George W. Bush is a war criminal because he started these foreign wars. So this article tells us that we could have decades of conflict if we don't nip it in the bud now. And I think they're right. As much scorn as I'm heaping on the media and the politicians for the illogic nature of these foreign wars, and how they pounced on one president for having these extra foreign wars, but they didn't on another. It still should be done, and we're facing here a really interesting juncture in history, and that's what's going to make next year and the elections really, really consequential. A lot of people talk about how in the past there's very little difference in practice between the Republicans and Democrats in terms of economics, in terms of defense. And very, very recently, when you look at between something like the George W. Bush and the Biden administrations, same groups of economic advisors aligned with the same banks, the same sort of economic policies, the same overseas elective wars. So sometimes Americans are surprised to hear Europeans talk about that there's no difference in our politics, when from the media perspective, it's all very hysterical that if one person is the devil and one person is the savior. But I think this time there are substantive differences, certainly with some of the things that Trump seems to be saying. And if you want something to take your mind off of this is my book. Can I play it? Okay. Young people find their dreams and failures in Bangkok, and then go on to the furthest places in search of something the modern world can no longer give. This is the story of There Are Still Unknown Places, my new novel on sale at Asia Books and on Kindle ebook. It's a tale for a new generation, disillusioned by the promises of the world, wanting to search for their destinies in far-off places. So that's my novel. It's a big novel. I worked a long time on it. And it is about disillusionment and going to far-off places and the different worlds that we really can never perhaps grasp and understand. So here's our Art of War pack of cards we look at every day. Today we've got Catch Your Adversary Sleeping. Strategy. Surprise your adversary where he is unprepared or you are unexpected. The basis for this surprise brings your adversary into engagement on your terms. So we have to think, how do we use this in our personal or business life? Element of surprise, I guess. So, but anyway, that's today's headlines. You know, I'm doing this because I think that we can get all wrapped up in just the news being shouted at us from the media, and now more and more it's corporatized. A lot of these news aggregation sites give all the same articles, the same bland articles without context. I just want to give a little context because it makes me feel a little better. It might make you feel a little better in understanding what's really going on in the world. And I will see you tomorrow.